Sorry.
Alright. I'm not a safe. You're not. Okay.
Might as well give you a chair, Reni. Good morning, everyone. Good morning. We'd like to begin by acknowledging that the land we are gather on is the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabe, the Huron-Wendat, and most recently, the territory of the Mississaugas of the New Credit First Nation. The territory was the subject of the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Treaty, an agreement between the Haudenosaunee Confederacy and the Anishinaabe and allied nations to peaceably share and care for the resources around the Great Lakes. This territory is also covered by the Upper Canada Treaties. Today, the meeting place of Toronto is still the home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to work in the community on this territory. Well, I am so very, very pleased to welcome you to the second annual 6 Degrees Citizen Space. This year, as with last year, the issue of creating inclusive societies is important as ever. So thank you for joining us to connect and also to come away with concrete proposals. Before we begin, I'd like to mention, as Karen did earlier, that we are live streaming all of our 360 sessions. That means you could be watching us from anywhere in the world, and even closer to home. Joining us this morning, for instance, are groups watching from 3 branches of the Toronto Library System. So, hello to everyone at the Albion Library in Rexdale, the people of Cedar Brae and Scarborough, and the group watching from York Woods in North York. We are delighted to be working with the libraries to ensure these conversations extend beyond downtown Toronto and reach out into our great, vast city. A special shout out to the Pearson GTAA youth cohort at the beautiful new Albion Library. So let's start. It is hard to keep up with all the bad news about walls going up these days. Regina Catrambone, whose organization rescues people forced to flee their countries, told the CBC recently that a growing concern is whether NGOs like her own can guarantee they are taking refugees from an unsafe place to a safe place. Another guest this morning, Margaret Atwood, may not have been so surprised when the American president, speaking at the United Nations, declared that, quote, "We must protect our nations, their interests and futures, and that the UN must, quote, reform if it is to be an effective partner in confronting threats to sovereignty, security, and prosperity," in, presumably, the Gilead of The Handmaid's Tale novel and series alike, as in elsewhere. Novelist and jurist Bernhard Schlink comes to us from Berlin. His nation-state opened its borders to refugees for a critical period, and politicians had to withstand enormous criticism for the gesture. In recent years, Germany has been viewed by many as the glue that has held the European Union together to stop the former borders and barriers between countries from going back up. That said, not 48 hours ago, a far right-wing party won 13% of the vote in the German election. Reni Eddo-Lodge, journalist and author from London, believes invisible walls are becoming more visible through activism. Even so, pro-Brexit sentiment in the UK seems to many to be anti-immigrant and to be a manifestation of institutional or systemic racism, a towering wall still unseen by many who live behind it. Finally, economist Robert Johnson's long career has focused in part on income inequality and underlying issues of race and privilege in America. Trump's United States appears to be about higher barriers, but no less striking has been the concerted, forceful responses of citizen groups, efforts that may be as defining of our age as the behavior of a rogue president. Myanmar and the Mediterranean, Europe and England, United States, Mexico and Canada, all kinds of walls, visible and invisible, self-evident and contested. Where to begin? I propose this. Trying to make human beings better, or much better, is one tough assignment. As a species, we probably do crave our walls, both types. We probably are more shaded, more exclusionary, tribal, more nation state in the Trump sense than we'd care to admit. A better strategy than bemoaning the animal we are, or at least a strategy more likely to succeed, is to clearly identify the ugliness, the dumbness, the sadness, and smallness of loving walls so much, loving that nation of fill in the blank, or of what an ICC board member recently said to me, the quote, persuasive and apparently incurable fear of the other, and then going about suggesting other ways, better ways to think about this. Other language via other thoughts via other language. Persuasion as much as censor. Demonstration more than denunciation. Showing in effect, not just telling, how we can think about and do this differently. Here's what we need to accomplish in the next 90 minutes. All of us together in this circle. We need to discuss, I think, and my partners on stage may want to expand that or change that right away. We need to discuss walls in our heads, walls in our systems, and how to bring them down. To start, I'd like to ask each of our 5 guests to tell me simply how they understand or how they think about the word wall or walls. I would like to start with Bernhard. As a Berliner, you've lived much of your adult life with a fairly famous wall in your hometown. Speak to us, please, about walls.
Up until today in Germany, if you talk about the wall with a capital W, everybody knows you talk about the wall that divided Berlin and Germany into its eastern Russian-occupied communist part, the GDR, and the western democratic free part, the Bundesrepublik. And the wall was meant, of course, like any border, to control people who wanted to come in, but more than that, it was meant to keep people in and keep them from walking out. So it was more a prison wall than a normal border fence. And it divided colleagues, friends, lovers, families, and it was a real burden on many of us. So when it came down on November 9, 1989, there was a big joy. It was almost like a spring of love between East Germans and West Germans who finally could get together again. And Angela Merkel, our Chancellor, who is from East Germany, certainly has experienced the wall intensely. And when sometimes people wonder why did she open the border for 1.3 million refugees, that certainly played a role. She had experienced what walls can do, the bad that walls can do, and that's one reason why she opened the German borders.
Same time though, Bernhard, as many people who experience the Berlin Wall and the divides want to keep it closed still. So you and Merkel and people of your sort of political affiliation see it as a way of, a reason why you might, the generosity was extended. Others didn't agree or don't agree. So the wall remains for them necessary.
Not that wall, but other walls, walls around Europe, walls around Germany against those who come from the Balkan. So yes, many think walls are still needed, and I mean, it's complicated.
It's complicated. We're going
Rooms have walls.
Yes.
Houses have walls. Homes have walls. And they also have doors that we can open,
Yes.
but they also can shut. So it's
Right.
a complicated issue.
Complicated is a word that we use a lot here. Reni, walls.
So I think that in sort of polite, socially liberal society, there's a general consensus that walls are bad, and that they speak to a kind of parochialism, perhaps. Now, I am probably to the left of that position, so I wouldn't say that I really agree, because I know that at times in life I have had to put up a wall for my own sanity, my own self-protection. And so I'm a writer, author and journalist who focuses on institutional racism, looking at the big picture of British political society and social society. And I attempt to try and call attention to the invisible walls in our society, namely institutional racism. You know, we have drastic, the numbers show repeatedly over and over again, drastic racial inequalities between people who are not white and people who are white in British society.
Right.
You know, far more likely to be treated harshly in the criminal justice system, far more likely to be marked down by their own teachers, non-white children, when it comes to taking exams to take them into secondary school or university.
Right.
Far more likely people with African and Asian sounding names are, alongside their white counterparts, are less likely to be called to interview when it comes to the job application process over and over and over again. I think when you look at those statistics, some of which I call attention to in my work, you can either draw one or two conclusions. So you can say, well, this is happening to these people because they're inherently inferior, or you can say, wow, we still have a massive problem with institutional racism in our society. Now, throughout my writing and speaking and thinking life, I've attempted to make the latter argument, and I think repeatedly I found people who are not directly affected by these issues in a negative way, most of whom who are white, saying, well, actually, no, we live in a meritocracy, this is all in your head, etc., etc. Stop creating divisions. Often if you point to the divisions, you're told that you are creating those divisions. And so one day, about maybe 3.5 years ago, I thought about those rebuttals that I was getting from people who were not directly affected by those issues, and I just thought, wow, I can't attempt to try and discuss this problem with people who don't even recognize that the problem exists in the first place.
So, and is this what you said, for your own sanity you had to sort of
yes, absolutely.
create this?
So
okay.
I declared one day, I wrote on my website, I wrote a piece called Why I'm No Longer Talking to White People About Race. And in that I said, I cannot deal with the defensiveness, the denial. You know, I said, I'll talk to white people about anything else, their dogs, Coronation Street, the weather, their holiday, just not race, because it's emotionally exhausting to have to try and make the case over and over again that, hey, racism exists. And that was ostensibly a wall. That was a wall. That was me saying, right, I'm stepping out of the ring for a while. I can't do this for my own self-protection. And I think that that's something that we should recognize. We should recognize those structural inequalities, and we should recognize our own complicity in walls sometimes. Because I had to create a wall to sort of, you know, explain the existence of a wall. And what we're talking about there is a dominant ideology that lies in many people's heads. It's quite a slippery one.
Equate a wall to recognize wall or reveal wall. We'll come back to that. Margaret, something about walls, bears maybe.
Yeah, I'm really old.
That wasn't the answer I was expecting. But
I'm framing it for you.
Okay.
So, since I'm really old, I go back to World War II, and therefore I've been very interested in totalitarianisms and police states and how they get that way. And I just came from St. Louis, where there are famously protests going on right now over the issue of police shooting largely black people. And what I said there was, if you have a situation in which police are judge, jury, and executioner, you have a police state. And you do not want to live in a police state, and I enumerated the reasons why you do not want to live in a police state, and everybody went nod, nod, nod.
Right.
So that's the United States, which is quite different from Canada in the way demographics are arranged. We have other kinds of wall problems. The people who have had the biggest wall problem in this country have been indigenous people. And you're starting to see some of those walls coming down now. But back to walls as a general concept, You're safer in bear country if you're in a house than you are if you're in a tent. There are some things that you do want to protect yourself from, and that's why people build walls. Back in the 70s, we used to play a game that went along the lines of, is it better to be in a walled city in times of food scarcity, or is it better to be a nomadic group attacking a walled city?
Oh, okay.
So
What are the, okay.
Yes, why was it the 70s? I don't know. But I'm going to take this all the way to climate change.
All right.
Going back to 6,000 years, it was nomadic people attacking walled cities because the climate had changed and agriculture was suffering and pastoralism, that is herding, was coming in, and the herding people were nomadic and they wanted more territory. We're now in another moment of climate change. Climate change means food shortages. And food shortages means desperate people, and desperate people are on the move. And it also means social unrest, and then you get wars, and desperate people are on the move. We're living that now.
Yes.
That's why there's a refugee problem. It's because people are desperate. So the next question is, how many desperate people can be absorbed into a given society without everybody getting desperate for one reason or another?
Right.
And I believe that that is what you're thinking about when you say it's complicated.
Exactly.
Yes.
Is that what you mean?
That's
Yeah.
exactly what I mean.
That's what you mean. How many? And Canada, as we all know, is a country of many diversities. So it seems to be conceptually easier for people to bring other people in, most notably recently Syrians. And I know a number of people who have been bringing in groups of Syrian people, and Karoloff has just published a book about bringing in a family from Afghanistan. So it's not a huge jump for us as it is for many European countries, because they feel that they are monolithic. And here comes this other group, which is not like them. So Canada has an easier time of that because of its extreme diversity.
Okay.
But this is your problem, is it not?
Yeah.
We also are, from sea to sea to sea, harder to get into.
Yes.
Except for people walking across the border, as it turns out, from the United States. And Canada has always been the place that you escaped to from the United States when things were too hot for you down there. So we're going to have that problem too. How many?
Let's come back to that, but nice segue into Regina. I'd like to ask Regina, 65 million people are displaced at the moment, are on the move. What do, walls for you?
For me, for us as Moas, walls are not only bricks or wire fences. A wall can be the sea. A wall can be a desert. And but the most difficult wall is the wall that is in our hearts. So if we manage already through our work in Moas to overcome the walls of the desert, of the sea, but I think the most difficult things for everyone is to overcome the walls in our hearts and in our minds. If we manage to do that with empathy, I think we can survive, because we are all a human race here. I'm Italian, I come from Italy. In my country, this year, almost 6,000 people per day were disembarked in our shore. So this is just a small number, but if you think per day for a migration season, that is a large number. And unfortunately, the people then are trapped because we have some kind of law, it's called Dublin law, Dublin 3, that don't allow them to, it's very difficult then to do family reconjunction and other things. So I think the most difficult wall to to overcome is not a brick wall or wire fences. It's the wall that we trying to build between one person and the other in our heart, because we are too much afraid of sharing. And this is my second day in Canada, and honestly, I've never been in this country. I feel hope here, so I'm very blessed to be here.
Well, welcome to Canada, Regina.
Thank you.
At our best, perhaps. Rob, don't you think? At our best. I mean,
Yeah,
it's lovely when people
we
come.
can be pretty horrible,
Exactly,
really.
thank you, yes. Just say it. Rob, Holmes. Oh, sorry, Walls. Never mind. Walls, please.
Walls. I'm reminded of the anthropologist Pierre Bourdieu, who created an epigraph of an earlier book, which said, he quoted a man named Reni. And he said, "The spirit of the castle is contained in the drawbridge."
The spirit of the castle is contained in the drawbridge. Okay.
There are physical elements, but I think it's the invisible walls that are the most powerful and most dangerous, particularly those we are unconscious of. Sometimes I believe walls are valuable. You described fortifying yourself by creating a boundary. You might call it a wall, but as I explored your book, I actually thought it was a bridge. But the alert that came from that title, from your blog post, brought people to an awareness that perhaps they had been creating a wall unmindfully. I work most focally with regard to economics and finance. I would like to see some psychological walls constructed in the United States which dissuade wealthy people and corporations from believing that they own the rules that govern our society, which contorts the balance, exacerbates the fear, and poisons the spirit in our castle. So I believe walls can be good, walls can be bad. As Roger Waters said, the leader of Pink Floyd, he's worried about us all becoming comfortably numb.
Comfortably, yes.
And that's where I think the dilemma sits. You can be comfortable from the protection of the wall, but you're numbing yourself to some dynamic, some challenge that could help you and your society be moved to a better place.
I mean, if I might push back on, well, not really push back, but rather respond to those last two provocations, that point that you speak about empathy and sort of linking in what you've said as well, Robert, which is that there are actually dominant ideologies at play that incentivize us not to be empathetic.
Yes.
And nationhood is part of that, right? Isn't that really why so many people are against the idea of extending our compassion to refugees? In the kernel of that sort of ideology is a lack of empathy. We are not to empathize with those people, even though sometimes our governments have, via their foreign policy decisions, participated in those people being displaced in the first place.
Charlie,
Regina first, and then Rob, please.
About this, I bring a movie
And
here
we need to,
that
sorry,
I wish to
speak
show.
up if you can, Regina. We're having trouble with people hearing
sorry.
the microphones.
About this, I bring a movie here because I think that when there are people dying in the water, drowning, there is no walls, there is no politics that can stop the human nature to reach down and pull up this person. So if we can watch this movie, it's a 40-second.
Sure. Well, we'll cue the movie now about the work that Regina's group does. MOAS, Migrant Offshore Aid Station, if we can. And we're having trouble hearing at the back, is this correct?
Okay.
Okay. All right, Adrian. Well, Regina, on the water. There are no walls, you said, but is that true? Isn't that why they're there?
Unfortunately, there are the maritime law. There is the border. You know, we always worked in the international water in coordination with the Maritime Coast Guard of Italy, and we manage in.
I know. I actually mean, but it's lovely to say there are no walls in the water when you're rescuing people, but the people are in those boats trying to get across because of barriers, right?
The people are in the water
yes.
because not for the barriers, because they are in desperate need.
Right.
We rescued Syrian, we rescued Nigerian, we rescued many nationality. Most of them also now are coming also for the climate change. This is something that nobody's considering yet. Mm-hmm. There is no water, they cannot plant, so they can't survive. And this is something that is coming. In this video, there was an albino Nigerian. I don't know if you saw him, but he's persecuted in his own countries. There are many, many problems around the world. The problem that we are facing, that there are not enough safe and legal routes, or these safe and legal routes are not so fluid for the people. So families, so many Syrians, so many Sub-Saharan are coming from Libya because they are so desperate. I spoke with many of them. I remember a Syrian father, he was 75 years old, he was there with all his family, Yusuf. He told me, Regina, for me, I'm so desperate, I cannot stay in Syria anymore. It's like I'm going up, my house is on fire. I'm screaming for help and I'm waiting, but nobody's coming to help me. So I go at the top floor and then I jump from the window and they go for that 1% possibility. So my question to our millennials is how we will be judged for this if we don't reach out, if we don't help them. This is my question.
Okay. I'd like to go back to the psychological walls that America could maybe use. Could you expand on that a little bit, Rob?
Well, what I feel, I'm always attracted to the essay by Sartre of No Exit. The psychological walls are when the doors are open but you don't leave a hideous situation.
Yes.
And the question is, what is that invisible force that keeps you in that place? And I'll put it under the label of fear. That for some reason or another you don't trust. One mistake economists make is they act like they can see the future. But when we all live with the anxiety of an undefined future, what economists call radical uncertainty, we're drawing inferences about ourself, about our identity, about our safety. And what I find most psychologically haunting in my own life relates a little bit to what you were saying, Reni, just before the video. What I perceive is that when you define something, nation, race, other, those people in Africa, as unworthy, you're harming humanity. And what I believe, this is just a conjecture, I can't prove this, but what I believe is that our unconscious mind is very powerful.
Okay.
And when I observe treating any aspect of humanity as not human, I suspect my subconscious is fantasizing dreadfully about the day when those rules change. The baseball manager from Detroit that was so famous, Sparky Anderson, when he won the World Series, they say, "How do you feel?" And he said, "Take it easy. The world rolls over on top of somebody else every 24 hours." And the point is, even when my system of, we'll call it white priority or supremacy or whatever, for the moment doesn't leave me challenged or subject to abuse. That unconscious process is telling me that I live in a haunted house, because that inhumanity may be turned on me or my children at some point, and none of us should live in a haunted house.
Yeah.
Margaret, you're nodding, and then Reni. Okay. Margaret, you're nodding.
Yeah, I was nodding.
I took that to mean both agreement and perhaps a desire to say something about.
No, I was just nodding.
All right. Well, but actually, before I go to Reni, I actually would like to ask you, because isn't fear the fundament of totalitarian states?
Absolutely. They
afraid.
They institute fear, but they get that way in the first place because people are afraid. So totalitarianisms typically come out of social chaos, and they typically come out of then an appeal to, we can fix this, I will be a strong leader or whatever, and I will bring in a brave new world, except first we have to get rid of those people. They're all like that. First we have to get rid of those people, and then everything is going to be dandy. So then a program of getting rid of those people one way or another is instituted, but somehow the grand day never quite arrives. Then you have to get rid of more of those people. And who those people are changes. You can see it under Stalin. And many others. There always has to be an enemy. If it only weren't for them, everything would be great. So that is certainly a component, but they get that way out of social chaos in the first place, and fear. Like, what will happen to us? We're disintegrating, we're falling apart. We need a strong
leader.
Leader who will get rid of those people.
Bernhard first, and then Reni, because Bernhard, does this resonate with the way that power worked and the way the walls were kept up when you observed in Germany?
Everything that has been said about walls, everything bad that has been said about walls is true. It doesn't help in a situation where a society can't accept an unlimited amount of foreigners without getting serious problems. And then the society has to discuss and decide whom to take in and whom not to take in. And it has to secure its borders, otherwise it can't discuss and decide. So in the situation we are living in Europe, we need secure borders, or somewhat secure borders, to even discuss and decide whom can we take in and whom not. And these borders then often take the ugly shape of fences and barbed wire. And Canada, you mentioned it, is lucky, surrounded by two oceans, ice in the north, and a neighbor in the south who doesn't want to allow people in anyway. So you are in a particularly lucky situation. But Europe isn't. And it's not so much about the strangeness of someone who comes from Africa. The situation in Germany was very similar when it was about the refugees from the Balkans,
right,
as it is now.
Turkey,
it's just about how many can our society take in and still function as a society.
Okay.
And the 13% of right-wingers that came into parliament during the last election signal that it's difficult to keep up the cohesion of our society and to take in an almost unlimited amount of refugees.
So it becomes a matter of food and jobs.
It becomes a matter of food and jobs and education. And there one country can do so and so much, but only so and so much. And the problem is, I mean, some countries like the United States integrated their foreigners into the market, the labor market.
Well, once upon a time they did. Once upon a time.
As other European countries integrates its refugees into the social systems. And that is a problem. How many people out of jobs can a social system take?
Okay. Reni, and then Regina.
Thanks. I suppose that what you're saying works under the premise of society already being cohesive, because certainly refugees, even if they are trying to make their way into richer Western countries, I don't think they're under any illusion that they're entering a paradise, and each country still has its own social problems and existing inequalities. You know, I think one of the things that Donald Trump always goes after refugees under the basis of basically keeping America safe. But wasn't there just a shootout in a church by American citizens? And so that it doesn't have to be a political situation that refugees are integrated into social systems. We must question why these people are not finding their way into the labour market in the first place. I'm sure it isn't because they don't want to be in the labour market. I think that there are other dynamics at play here. So, and some of those dynamics are to do with prejudice against those refugees. I mean, we're working under the premise that it's becoming globalised, unfortunately, that if somebody is at our borders knocking on the door asking to come in, they're immediately a threat. And of course that leaks into hiring practices and how we treat these people, you know, on the streets, in our roads, in our schools. One of the repeated conversations that happens in the UK is, migrant children, refugee children are a threat to our school systems. They are holding everyone back because they don't speak English as a first language. Now, I went to school in the inner city, North London. Many migrant children in those first years of my schooling joined. They were speaking English fluently within a year. They were bilingual. I know some of them now. They are translators as professionals. And so I do wonder, are psychological walls towards these people's potential is absolutely contributing to a situation in which they are being treated as second-class citizens in our countries.
Regina, thank you. And then I'm going to open it up. Well said.
I think that we need to stop to think migration with proximity to the phenomenon. Now we have the social media. We can see everything and we can be in touch with the other side of the world, like with the flick of our fingers. So why still proximity to this phenomenon we shouldn't do that, because in Canada, in America, they're very well, they know very well what is happening in the Mediterranean. Now my team is in Bangladesh.
Yes.
We hear the call of the Rohingya people. We were there already, and now we are there. So we need to, one barrier that we have is here, because we think it's too far. Nothing is too far nowadays. So if there is a situation, there is someone in need, whatever country you belong to this world, and we need to stick for each other. So approach to the problem and trying to find solution, activate yourself, you know, yes. Be active. So this I wanted to throw the seed of, don't think that this phenomenon will not affect you, will affect each one of us, before or after, our daughter, our grandchildren. So more we are reluctant to approach and to go and help, and more we will pay later on. We are just pushing the problem.
We are at the 30-minute mark. I'm very happy with what we've established here. I'm noting the resonances with the Michael Sandel lecture last night around these issues, and I want to come back to that. But it's also time to start bringing our larger circle in. Marty?
Yeah, we have two interventions at this end. Sunny?
Sunny gets the first go at the box. Stand up, Sunny, and identify yourself, although I just identified you.
Okay.
I know.
Yes, my name is Sunny Bergman. I'm a documentary maker and an activist. I just wanted to say I disagree with the idea that those people that vote for the extreme right are doing so because of reasonable fear that the social chaos that will happen when... I think they're doing so because of fear-mongering of politicians, and this fear-mongering happens because it distracts from the real problems that they're facing. That's...
anyone want to... Bernhard, perhaps, do you want to address that?
Unreasonable fear is something the society has to deal with as much as with reasonable fear. And
Microphone
so,
up. I'm sorry, we're having terrible troubles with these things, huh? Yeah.
okay. Even if the fear of those who voted for the right-wingers are unreasonable, it's still something that a society has to deal with.
Yes, but by saying that that society is going to be destabilized when these numbers come in, you're kind of giving in to that fear. Instead, you have to say, like, these people that vote, like in general, for the extreme right normally face the same kind of problems that the refugees could face. They have housing problems, they have employment problems, but politicians use fear-mongering to distract from those problems.
Okay. Another intervention, Marty, and could I just, and I know Rob wants to speak, and just emphasize, I think, like, do I have a naturally loud voice? Are you hearing me better than other people? Do I have a better microphone? That's terrible. I should have gotten the worst microphone. It's because, oh goodness, Margaret, I'm not even going to say that. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Hi. I'm not sure if this is a question or a comment yet, but I wanted to go back to Reni, what you were saying about language. And I think there are two conversations surrounding it, and I think the more popular one is about what you were saying about how people assume that because people don't speak English, it's going to be difficult. But I think there's the other conversation, and both are perhaps quite Anglocentric, but so I apologize. But I think the other conversation is what language actually can do to create those walls.
Okay.
And I think a lot of that has to do with conversations about like PC culture and things like that. But I also think that as a writer, there is a responsibility to be not careful with your language, but to use language in a particular way, to not, even hearing things like, we have to help them or reach out to them, like these things can be quite othering, and I wonder if you could speak to that conversation surrounding language.
Thank you, Jamie. Reni, and then Rob wants to speak, and then we'll go back out if we can.
I'm not quite sure of your question. Can you?
I don't think it's a question. I don't really know.
Because I mean, if it's just a comment, I don't need to respond. But I broadly agree. I think.
All right.
But also, I think that like nobody would enter a country to live there and not attempt to learn the language. I think anybody who enters a country with the aim of living there is going to attempt to try and learn the language, unless that's being withheld from them. One really interesting thing that happened in Britain a couple of years ago was that state funding for refugees and migrants to learn English as a second language was cut. Amongst this sort of like rhetoric of refugees and migrants being a threat. So we can really see the hypocrisy there, you know. Anyway.
Yes. Rob, and then I actually want to check in with Marty about about the direction of this conversation.
I have two thoughts. One, just before we went to the audience, I could sense a tension that resonated with Michael Sandel's lecture last night. He cast a situation where everyone should be able to leave, but who should be able to come in?
Right.
And what I found confusing about that last night, I thought about this morning, is that I think what Bernhard was putting his finger on is an individual should be able to leave, and maybe an individual should be able to come, but in a crisis of scale, the congestion of everyone coming in can disrupt the home, and the question is, do people have a right to protect themselves against a large-scale change in population? Now, this brings to mind lots of things, like why aren't we as humans doing things vis-a-vis climate change in Libya, in Syria, so that they don't have the need to come?
Regina, speak.
Yeah, we react.
Sorry.
No, because we are always reactive to the migratory phenomenon. We are not proactive. This is the problem. This is the real problem, that we wait and we don't manage this migratory phenomenon. We continue to be like speechless, but we cannot do it anymore. We cannot stand by and watch anymore. That's it.
Okay. Marty, I want to check in with Marty,
I just had a quick response to the lady
Sure,
in the
and
back.
then by all means, okay.
When you talked about the far right, I want to bring in the notion of what my friend George Soros calls the manipulative function of information. The cognitive function he describes is how we try to learn and make better in our world. The manipulative function is when you try to convince people to perceive something which has no necessary anchor in truth, but satisfies their emotions so that they act in a way that makes you better off. In America, why don't blue-collar white people and black people fight while we cut taxes for the rich and just keep going on? It's a displaced focus, and it is an active strategy, and it's a pernicious strategy.
Yes, okay. I want Marty to weigh in just from the perspective of how you're seeing things so far. And then I also want to note that I believe there are many people behind me who must want to get in on this.
No, I got it.
Let's activate this whole room.
I think what I'll do is, this does work.
Yeah, it is.
It is funny to talk into this. But there's 5 comments that I want to get to in the audience. So I think what I'll do is borrow a page from John's book, which is to go take each of the comments, and then we'll maybe find a way to incorporate those into the dialogue. So I'll start up here.
Thank you. So I want to come back to something that was
quickly
brought
with
up.
Your name.
Oh yes, for sure.
And stand so I can.
It's really awkward to stand because I'm tall and I'm like I don't. Should I just like spin around the whole time?
All right.
So Tansei, Justin the Sikasan, Machif Napiaunia, Saskatoon. My name's Justin. I'm Métis from my homelands are in Saskatchewan. I want to pull a particular thing that you said, maybe in passing, Regina, at the beginning about home, and the idea that you've been here for 2 days and already felt home. I think the reality of that is...
No, I felt hope.
Hope. My bad. That makes sense. That's great. Well, I think, I mean, we can extend it beyond home to hope as well, because I think whether it's home or hope, I think who has that sense of feeling is also... I think that the fact that you experience that is very different for a lot of people, right? In the context of home, if I think about home, you know, this is not this particular place, but in my homelands, many of my people don't even feel home anymore, let alone hope.
Okay. What is your homeland?
My homelands are in the middle of this country, in Saskatchewan. The Métis homeland is my people are of this place, of this country, of Turtle Island. And so I think whether it's home or whether it's hope, I think we also have to think about who's able to feel that. And the identities and the experiences that we have shapes our ability to actually feel home or feel hope.
Thank you.
So I think it's telling that you feel hope, but I'm sure there are many people who don't feel hope, and I think that's also okay. And how can we ensure that whether it's home or hope, people of all experiences and identities are experiencing that in Canada, because many people are not.
Are you referring to the point that Canada's a country of settlers? Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, I think it's about the idea that Canada is a country of settlers. Sorry, yeah.
Throw it.
Of overwhelming settlers.
Yeah, of settlers for sure, but I think many settlers themselves, right, who come to this country, refugees, newcomers, people of particular identities and experiences. In the context of Toronto, I know it's many black folks, many Muslim folks don't feel home or don't feel necessarily hopeful because of how they're treated when they walk down the street. Yeah. So I think that's real.
I mean, I don't disagree with you. I mean, you know, when I talk about whiteness in particular, I'm talking about a dominant ideology, one which wars are very much a part of it. I'm not also, I think sometimes people get a little bit confused and I'm talking about individual people's skin colours. I'm talking about a dominant ideology of racism with a capital W, white, right? Like its whole aim is to concentrate power. I think it's also a bit weird and interesting that in this sort of conversation, you know, and we're talking about borders and whatnot, and yesterday in the lecture, I thought about the fact that I could just sort of waltz into this country with my British passport, you know? I think that we should all think about that, those of us who are participating from abroad, about the just inherent privileges that some of our passports grant us in order to move around the world when other people are dying at sea.
Thank you, Marty. I'd like to keep the cube moving. Oh, all right.
I'm going to go back there, and then we'll come back here,
okay.
And then we'll go up there.
Hello? Right. Okay. Hi, everybody. Is this working? Yeah. Hi, everybody. My name is Anara. I'm from Toronto. I'm one of the junior fellows this year. So quick question. We all talked about the Syrian refugee crisis, but that's only like one issue that's happening all around the world. So how do we as global citizens, or even as Canada, prioritize these issues? Like last year especially, like a lot of people were supporting Syria. However, on Facebook and other social media platforms, people are supporting different countries. So do you think it's right to prioritize these issues that are taking place, or we should not be prioritizing?
Let's keep going with the comments, and then we'll see what people on stage like discuss.
Hi, my name is Emma. I've just been noticing both from last night and today that to me it seems like we have a bit of a narrative problem. So on the one hand, you have right-wingers talking a lot about the economics and the economic drain of refugees and immigrants. And on the other hand, we have us talking about the moral issues a lot. And we kind of end up in this logic schism where we're not even talking about the same thing. And I think it's important to challenge that narrative that refugees or immigrants or migrants are a drain on the economy. Like, that is such a prevailing dominant narrative. And at least in Canada, that is absolutely not the case. Immigrants in this country have some of the best outcomes of any citizen. And in fact, we need immigrants to build this country. They have helped build this country. And I think we need to acknowledge that narrative failure and really challenge that narrative that refugees or immigrants are a drain.
Okay, thank you.
And this, sorry, was the hope that I felt
That's
here.
the hope you felt, okay.
Coco Montague, and I'm surprised that we've been talking about problems and very little about solutions.
We're getting
Walls
there. We're getting
and
there.
bridges have two-sided. They are both to block and to bring people. We can think, nobody talked about the best efficient bridge that the US have created in Mexico, which is Macarena, on a whole industrial barrier that has attracted so many Mexicans to improve their life without coming to the US. The other point that I'd like to make is to fight the walls or the problems. We can use humor. And one of the things I propose is to create a prize for the people who find the best solution to have a catapult above the wall, or to make a portable machine that can drill under the wall, you know, and have prizes and make a major affair out of these all over the world to show that the walls do not work. You know, there should be solutions and not walls.
Thank you, Jean. Jean or Coco. All right.
Great. Hi, I'm Tilo from Toronto. So drawing a little bit from the conversation from last night at the keynote, one thing I would find interesting if we could touch on it a little bit is the sort of the deeper implications of walls as dividers. So we talk a lot, when we talk about refugees, we talk a lot about economic opportunity, people coming for economic opportunity, and the carrying capacity of society. But what if, you know, hypothetically, we found some way to offset that? If the West, quote unquote, sees, you know, at least the injustice of inegalitarian structures across societies and offsets their responsibility by redistributing the wealth. In those particular circumstances, would we be justified in drawing boundaries? If we could offset those economic differences, would we be justified in then drawing boundaries for communitarian reasons? And a related question, sort of to put this a little bit more concretely, I'm not an expert in Middle East politics by any means, but recently I understand the Kurds are undergoing a referendum in Iraq to create their own state in the Middle East. If that referendum were successful, hypothetically, would a group that has suffered historical injustices like the Kurds be justified in erecting their own boundaries to protect themselves from what they would see as societies around them that have historically oppressed them?
Thank you. Is that the first 5 that you were looking for? You have one more? Okay, all right. Hey.
Hi. My name is Kola from India. Great exchange of thoughts, wonderful format. I have 2 points to add. One, I think I resonate so much with you, Reni, when you said I cannot talk to white people about racism anymore because they just cannot relate to it. I've run into such issues myself. At the same time, I always wonder, how can we still involve and draw them into that conversation, because we cannot be a closed people and need to explore ways. I'm confused myself, but I would love to invite thoughts on that, on how you still draw them into conversation, because it's important to make them participants too. That's one. And the second one is for the countries that refuse to give refuge to refugees today, only need to look back into history to see how they, without permission, ventured explored, maybe even plundered everything that was available without permission, and today just say, no, we do not allow you, right? So I think those are 2 things.
All right, thank you, Paula. One more, and then I want to arc back to Rob and Katrina, and then Marty. We're almost at the 60-minute mark, so I need help from you as we turn towards the final third. Danny.
My name is Danny Ramadan. I'm a Syrian refugee myself. I came here to Canada 3 years ago. It's actually lovely to see all of you discussing the Syrian refugees, and I'm like, hi. I'm here. Hi. Honestly, I just want to bring the conversation back to the concept of home. As somebody who comes here, who comes to this nation as a refugee, I would like to do my best to actually create home here. It is such a complex experience to come here and you call this place home while also keeping your connections to your roots as Syrian, and also accepting that a lot of people are going to always ask you where you're from, and then you say something like, I'm from Vancouver because it's 7 o'clock in the morning and this is Starbucks line and I don't want to talk to you about Syria. And then they ask you where you're really from. And then that starts this whole conversation that in my head is like, you're telling me that I'm not from here. So how can I build a home here when I'm told over and over again that I'm not part of this community? How can I be, and at the same time balance that with the concept that I would like to remain Syrian. Yes, I would like to become Canadian and to integrate into this community, but I would like to also remain Syrian and respect my culture, respect my traditions, respect my heritage. Thank you.
Danny, Danny, both, and I want you both to hold your thought for tomorrow because Homes is tomorrow morning, and these are naturally flowing conversations, and what we're doing right now is laying down a lot of the foundations for the rest of 6 degrees. But that one for sure we're going to come back to. Marty, where are we at, do you think, as we turn the corner on the 60-minute mark, and then I want to bring it back in for a moment anyways.
Well, I think we had a lot of really significant interventions, and I think I'd like to ask you to take it back to the stage and address some of them, starting particularly with with the question, which is, we've done a lot of good work describing the problem, and without getting into this afternoon's issue, which is building bridges, can we talk more, focus more on the question of how do we deal with walls? We are understanding where they're coming from. How can we better deal with, how can we better address the problem of walls that we've heard that they come from fear, we've heard that they're created by authoritarian despots, but really I think what we want to dig into, you know, in terms of an inclusive society, 2 things that are working, 2 things that need work. Okay. All right, so we are turning the corner into the back third, and which is where we do talk about what we can do, towards your point, Coco. But first, Rob, I know you've been gathering thoughts. Do you want to share before we...
I'm just ready to go with this.
Oh, Rob is ready to go with this. Put the microphone up or speak from your... Where you... Diaphragm, is that right? Speak.
All right. When I heard your comment about Syria, everything in my life is always music. So I just heard Bob Dylan's Like a Rolling Stone. How does it feel to be all alone, a complete unknown with no direction home, like a rolling stone? What I enjoyed about what you said, what I enjoyed becoming acquainted with Reni's book and her thinking and the comment the lady over here made is that you all exhibited vulnerability. You didn't just go with your title on your blog post and walk away despondent. As I said earlier, your book is a bridge. Because you articulated your pain, because you explored the injustice, you gave people a roadmap of how to respond. That's a lot more hopeful than creating your own wall. With the disorientation and the requests that you made for how the context can respond to you sparks imagination, and that's a gift. I want to suggest to you all, there's a woman in Houston whose name is Brenna Brown. She's quite popular in this TED world, but she's just written a book about polarization in healing called Braving the Wilderness. And it's about being vulnerable. It's about understanding your own shame. And it's about what I'll call an indelible will and an integrity of what she calls true belonging. She was inspired by Maya Angelou, the poet, to talk about how you have to be able to like yourself enough to stand in communities you disagree with and be brave enough to be vulnerable and express, not in a hateful or accusatory way, but as if those people could become your allies. And I think what I guess I'm saying is hardness meets hardness, and it creates distance. Softness melts hardness. Not always. That's part of the danger. That's part of my own fear. But I don't think there's any other path. That's what artists are for.
All right.
That's what artists are doing. They're bearing witness. Your work, your writing, you're more journalistic, but painting pictures, so people like that have the fuel to persuade people to change and evolve along with your program.
We have always guests on board of our vessels, and now also in Bangladesh, journalists from all around the world, because of course the ships is the body that will guest the people. The drones and the aeroplane that go in search of the people are the eyes of our mission, but the real voice of the mission are the journalists. And unfortunately, in around Europe, we have had a little bit of journalists that terrorize the people, trying to say, oh, there is an invasion, they are coming to invade us. And this doesn't really fulfill the picture, that doesn't show a picture. And to going back to Danny, I really wish to quote Sophie Trudeau, what she said yesterday. She said that we need to go back to the roots of our empathy. So I think we need to think about what are the roots of our empathy and where they stay. For me, for most, they stay in our hearts, and we always choose to be courage and to put our feelings and think about I could be that person, my family could be in that boat. And if we put ourselves in these migrants, I don't like even this concept anymore, right, because I think we need to overcome and don't stigmatize the word migrants. But migrants can give too much to society. If we recognize the beauty of what they have, if we manage to integrate them, if we just keep them in our country, but we don't talk to them, we don't embrace them, we will never be successful.
I want to get Bernhard to talk to us a little bit about, so I'm hearing a lot about how we need to change entrenched views, we need to change minds. I'd like Bernhard to talk about that project in the wake of the German election. I'd like Reni to talk about how vulnerability, showing her vulnerability in this raw, real conversation can be itself a change maker. And then I would like Margaret to tell us a little bit about how the artist can be that force. And then I want to go back out, Marty.
We've got 3 more questions.
Great, and then also, Karen, I want you to tell me if there's anything from the libraries, any questions coming from the people in the libraries. Bernhard, please, first. In the wake of the German election, what can be done?
Well, there can be no doubt that much of the fear in Europe and in Germany is unfounded. But it's still there and disrupts society.
And it's still being used, as Sunny said.
It's being used. So, yes, of course, one tries to enlighten people, and teachers try to do it in schools, And the absurd thing is in East Germany, where the fear is particularly high, there are hardly any strangers. So it's a fear that they bring from having been among themselves throughout 40 years of communist dictatorship. And since they haven't met strangers ever, they are particularly fearful.
It's Rob's ghost houses, a ghost,
fear
yes.
is unfounded again and again.
Yes.
But it's still something that society has to deal with and can't just neglect. And also, there are also problems that are really brought to a society with an influx of too many foreigners at a given moment.
Right.
And one can take in 1.3 million, as Angela Merkel did, in 1 year, but not in every year. And so, not to take them in every year, one has to have borders that keep people out and also allow people in after a discussion and decision how many we really can take in.
Okay.
So, yes, we have to fight unfounded fear. We have to try to enlighten and to teach and to get them used and make them accept. And it was wonderful in the ceremony yesterday how the Canadians say, "Oh, we are so grateful that you come to us." While in Europe the attitude is, you have to be grateful that we allow you in. So the attitude, of course, makes an enormous difference, and there's much that Germany and Europe can learn. All I'm saying is there are still real problems too.
Thank you.
What are the problems?
Oh, okay.
The problems, you said if we let people in, there are problems caused. What are they?
The problems, let's begin with the schools. We have so and so many schools and so many teachers. And classes where there are more foreigners than Germans are a challenge for teachers, are a challenge for the few students from different countries who have time getting together. Germany is a much harder language to learn than English, so they struggle with that. And then the labor market. To get them into universities or to get them into crafts and into industries, it's just not easily done.
Reni,
I think we should throw it out to...
No, I'm going to disagree. We have 10 minutes. I'm going to overrule, excuse me, because we're trying to turn the corner, we're trying to work on solutions rather than problems, or address them. I'm suggesting, I think Rob's suggesting, that your vulnerability is modeling a kind of solution. Do you see it that way? That you're putting yourself out there?
Yes, I think so. I mean, when I wrote the piece that eventually became a book, I was absolutely being very vulnerable because I was saying things that I think many people who have felt those same feelings of constantly having your testimony aggressively challenged. When you say, sort of like what our friend over here said, when you're being asked, where are you from, over and over again, and you're like, oh, hang on, can you please stop? Can I just get on with my day? You're told, oh, I'm grateful, etc., etc. Like, that is a real isolating experience. And I spoke about that isolating experience, that feeling of dealing with walls of anger, aggression, and denial when attempting to try and discuss racism. And, you know, what's been really interesting since my book came out, I've had many, many people write to me sharing their own personal stories. And at first I was a bit confused. I was like, oh, why has this prompted this? And then I realized that people are processing their own relationship with race and racism. I think particularly white people who the dominant ideology tells white people that they have no race, that they are the norm, and that everybody who has race is defined against them, against whiteness. I've had many white readers get in touch and say, this is really a difficult process for me to understand that I actually have a race, I am white, and what being white means in terms of racial power. I think that's really interesting. But really to sort of come back on your point about, how can we really, how can we make a change? How can we continue to sort of have that discussion if we close ourselves off? Well, I have to disagree with you about closing myself off. I mean, here I am. but also I think what I attempted to try and do with that was raw emotion a few years ago, was really try and channel it into something creative. I did an event in Australia a few weeks ago, and a man, he stood up at the Q&A and he said, "You can't have your cake and eat it. You can't say that you don't want racial injustice anymore, but you refuse to talk to me." And I said, "But I wrote 70,000 words on my position." And so, you know, reading is really a form of active listening. I think those of us in the audience who are concerned about these issues and are like, "Oh, well, how can I help? How can I help?" The beautiful thing is that those people from those marginalized groups have created the work. And you can choose to engage if you wish. It doesn't mean that you have to corner them at a party and say, "Justify yourself. Tell me where you're from. You know, tell me why you feel this way." They've created art. They've created books. You know, they've created documentaries, TV, film. And if we wish to understand that experience, we can if we choose to. And I would also call on people who are in that experience to continue to create. Of course, I would say that. I'm a writer.
Margaret. Margaret.
Yes, so your question was?
Well, these are, I feel we're in writer words here. We're vulnerability, empathy.
Okay, so I think your original question was, how does art help? Well,
yes, how can art help?
You just said it.
Reni just did.
So I would also say, however, that people are always telling writers what they should write. Writers are always not paying attention to that and writing instead what they feel called upon to write. And a lot of people right now feel called upon to write the kinds of experiences that you were talking about, but you can't tell them to do that.
Right.
If instead they want to write about Bob and Carol and Ted and Alice having a complicated series of love affairs, that's what they will do. So that there is that. I'm with you about income inequality. More equal societies, from the point of view of money, are happier societies. And it is absolutely true that the United States has become an oligarchy and that it is manipulating people at the down level to hate each other and to blame each other for not having enough money. Unfortunately, you've enacted a very idiotic law, which is that corporations are the same as people and can therefore give unlimited amounts of money to political parties. And we all know that that is what has happened in recent years. Let us just say that the French Revolution looms in your future if you keep on this way. Because you cannot have a society in which this many people control all of the money. You just can't, and that's true of the world in general. I'm going to mention 2 helpful books that will give you hope. And I will say that unless all of you had hope, you wouldn't be in this room, because why would you bother? So this is a pretty hopeful crowd. And one of them is called Drawdown, and it is a book about things that are happening right now that will cause a point at which more carbon will be removed from the atmosphere than is going into it. That's happening now. Drawdown.
Drawdown.
And the other one is called Clean Money.
Oh, yes.
And it's by Joel Solomon, and it's about, if you've got all of this money, how you could invest it in a more positive way to create better social outcomes. It's really about social investing.
Okay.
And those aren't very artistic things that I'm talking about, but they're hopeful things.
I've got 5 interventions.
All right, and
one back there.
Marty, we have 5 interventions and we have 5 minutes.
30 seconds each then.
30 seconds. We're going to be brutal about this. But thank you.
Hi, my name is Drakhshan. I'm a 6 Degrees Junior Fellow. And just for context, my parents are from Afghanistan. I'm born in Toronto. There's been a lot of talk today about, well, the past, I guess last night we talked about who has right to enter and leave countries. And a panelist today talked about how a lot of refugees or migrants or whatever, like a lot of people moving today are doing so because of climate change. And the question I had is just what is the difference between, in your opinion, between dying because of war, dying because of a bomb, and dying because you can't eat enough, or dying from poverty? I feel as though the reality is changing around the world, and with climate change, you're going to find people leaving more and more often because, like you said, droughts and everything. At the end of the day, they can't feed their kids, and their kids will die if they don't leave. And so we have these distinctions, like we're saying, you know, economic migrants are here. When it comes to deserving to leave and come, refugees are here. But at the end of the day, they both are gonna die if they stay. So I'm wondering, is it time to update our kind of conception of who deserves to leave and stay? How do we do so? And just, can you just speak about this a little bit?
Could we leave that as a comment for the moment so we can get to some other people? That's really interesting. It's a big, big
30
idea.
seconds.
Yes, 30 seconds, please.
Scully Squiggle, yo Dagwesti on Gets, O Quali, Newagi Deloda, on your Daaga, Newago Joda. My name is Andrea Christian, and I'm Ongwahoe, and I come from, this is my land, and it's Turtle Island. And why I'm here, I'm standing here with colleagues, because I'm not asking a question, I'm bringing a solution. And the solution to me is the investment in our young people, the investment in terms of acknowledging who they are as Anishinaabe, Lakota, Dakota, Afghanistan, and Onondaga. And I think it's really important that as a place like Toronto Council for our Native Cultural Centre, who serves 175,000 persons on an annual basis, they include your people. And to the gentleman in the corner, welcome to my land. You know. And we're told in our teachings that when we were placed here on Turtle Island, that we were to care for our mother. We're to care for our mother. We're to ensure that, and we don't separate her. We don't say this is a your treaty. This is something that you brought. And I think it's really important that you understand that. And it's not just all about this, because I have a 14-year-old, I have a 15-year-old, I have a little older than this really here. And it's really important that I want them to be engaged. And we invest in them. We invest in them and we talk about solutions. You know, if you're not part of the solution, then you're part of the problem. And that's something that we always advance. So to each of you who are here, I welcome you to Turtle Island. And it doesn't belong to anybody. I want to be really clear that the fact is that we have a tendency to get a little lost on what territory we're a part, but we are on our mother's land. And so I won't go, you know.
Thank you. Thank you. Marty, your call.
John?
So, hi. So just very, very briefly, first of all, I think that was an amazing intervention. And in the second 360, we're going to talk a lot more about the Anishinaabe and Indigenous point of view. And my only comment was, and I didn't think it quite came out, which is there are, I agree all the things about imagination, et cetera. I'm a writer too. But what really didn't come out was one of the reasons we have the crisis is not because there should be borders or not borders, it's because so many of the countries have not prepared themselves to accept people, which is what in a way you're all getting at but not actually saying is, to some extent, some countries have saying, okay, we're ready to do 300,000 this year, or 350,000, and we're going to put the money into the schools, or we're going to put the money into the healthcare, and we're going to do this every year, and every year we're going to say, can we do 350 next year? Can we do 400,000 next year? Maybe you have to do more, but you have to, but it's a question of the complete absence of policy and what follows from policy, which is investment in structures, in teachers, in schools, in all the things that you need in order to, in healthcare, in order to allow the societies to continue. It may be that one day you've prepared for 300,000, you're going to have to take 1 million. So be it. But if you don't have a policy at all, and you're not preparing at all, except at the grassroots level, but not at the top, then you have a real problem. And I think a large part of the European crisis is that, I'm just talking about this technical part of it, is that Europe at the policy organizational level has not put in place the structures for welcoming these people. So people are panicking, we're getting the fear, we're getting the racism, we're getting all the horrors. And yet there are also people at the grassroots who are working like mad to try and help people in and to help people get involved. But we're missing the big policies, we're missing the big investments. Thank you.
That's kind of, I have a question over here, but that was precisely Regina's point, I think, which is we're responding to the crisis. No one's getting in front of the crisis.
Right. And we just bought 5 more minutes, Karen.
Okay, great, because that's about as much time as I need. No, I'm kidding.
No, I didn't.
No, I'm Melissa, I'm
catch.
from Toronto, and I just, we talked about religious walls, political walls, educational, cultural, but I think the biggest wall of all is something that's really just deeply ingrained in human nature, and that's the ego and egocentrism. And how do we strip down self-importance? How do we open up to understanding? And can we do that at a level that enacts massive change? And where does it start? As I think is the root of everything.
Thank you. Do we have, oh yes, okay.
Thank you. My name is Shirley Bloomberg. I'm an architect practicing in the city here, and I wanted to address what we can do. And your question of Bernhard Schlink, what are the challenges in Germany, for example? So in August, I was meeting with Thomas Dauer, who's a professor at the Technical University in Munich and one of the best energy engineers in the world. And I was meeting with a Danish architect to talk about issues of global housing crisis and so on. What Thomas told me was that the reaction against welcoming 1.3 immigrants, refugees, the problems and the concerns, and I'm just quoting him, in Germany was that there isn't enough affordable housing in Germany right now, and to add another 1.3 million people to that is a major practical challenge. These are practical challenges. If you don't have housing, you can do nothing. So then he told me about one of the major reinforced concrete contractors in Germany has given up traditional practice of construction. And what they are devoting their entire company to is developing modular precast concrete housing for people to satisfy this global crisis. I would say that is something that we could do practically.
Excellent. Marty, do we have one more or two?
Thank you. I have one more back there, one more up here.
Okay, and then I'm going to end it with giving the people in this circle the chance for a final word.
Let me just throw this to the chief first.
All right.
All right. Honey, welcome everybody. Chief Stacy for Mississauga's the credit. Thanks for inviting me to be a part of your events yesterday and today. I see a flaw in the foundation of your gathering, though. Discussion on immigration should not occur without and I know it's going to be part of it tomorrow or later, the foundation should not be started without the discussion from the First Nations people of the land. They should be part of that discussion. Secondly, while I value and understand the need to deal with immigration because it is a day-to-day problem, that's not the issue. That is just a symptom of what we're dealing with, and until we address the disease itself, we'll always just be putting out symptoms. and so at some point in time, regardless, I know we have to do this, but at some point in time we have to get back to the disease itself. And the disease itself, in my opinion, is the fact that we don't have a vision. We don't have a world vision, we don't have a Canada vision, we don't have a First Nation vision, we don't have a... So, and I recognize that there are those out there who can't or won't make that vision because their reality will not allow it because of where they fundamentally are. But until we start talking about that, see, if we don't have a vision, we'll never be more than we are. And we have to be better than we are. So, I'm really excited to be here, but at some point in time, I know you do great work, John, so let's move to a big, broad discussion about where do we need to go for this world, this country, and the people in it. Miigwech.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Danielle. I'm from Australia. Thank you for having me in your beautiful country. We have very similar fears in Australia. In fact, we've got such a big fear of people coming across the seas by boats, by a couple of hundred, that we've spent thousands and millions of dollars keeping these people out of our country. And the thing that strikes me about Canada and Australia is that people don't get there by accident. And I think that we have a real problem when we keep talking in these sorts of countries about the refugee crisis. It's not happening on our doorsteps. It's happening in and around Europe. That's where we need to turn our focus. That's where countries like Australia and Canada can make a real difference. And in a couple of years' time, we're going to be talking about the ageing population and how much we need immigrants coming in, because there ain't going to be nobody looking after the next generation. So I think, part of the solution might be starting to, particularly when we're talking about economically driven solutions, might be starting to talk about that ageing population. I'm pro-open borders. I think that there's a huge economic benefit from that. People don't generally want to leave where they're coming from. So if we can think of a global solution to a more open border approach, I think that could drive economies and also see this crisis of people think that people want to stay in their country. They don't. That's it. That's what I want to say.
Thank you, Dan. We have so much more to talk about, but Karen is telling me we are over, and we have to say goodbye to our live stream friends in the library system. But I would like to end, and Danny, we'll get to you this afternoon, tomorrow morning. I want to emphasize 2 points and then give everybody in this circle the final word to tell me, to tell us, 30 seconds, and a solution, a simple solution, because this is what's going to drive forward these conversations. And who would like to go first? Margaret, would you go first?
Well, I'll stick with my my money point.
Money point, okay.
Better distribution of money and more focused application of money, and particularly in countries that are having these crises that are causing people to want and need to leave. So rebuilding infrastructure where it has been destroyed and putting a lot of attention into re-greening the planet, because greener locations are more productive economically and happier places for people to live.
Rob, thank you.
Bernhard, you made a very important statement. The fear may not be right, but it's there and you have to deal with it. So I listened to John. You talked about what is a plan, what is a strategy for meeting this challenge and succeeding and validating our humanity. That's a hopeful plan. You spoke about a larger vision. That is part of that reaching forward. The thing that struck me most off balance in this entire experience, and I had to think about, was when you started by framing and saying you were old. This took me by surprise. I understood what you were doing by talking about being old. It was allowing you to reach back to history. One of the ingredients is we can't eradicate history. We have to understand that awfulness is part of the cumulative human experience, and that's what should redouble our efforts. But when I heard you throughout this session, and I followed how you stepped up your activism and your visibility as a public figure, in addition to being an artist, I go to Bob Dylan's My Back Pages. I was so much older then, I'm younger than that now. Being relentless about vision, about plans, and acknowledging the fear that has to be addressed is the solution. Not a concrete solution, not a technocratic solution, a human process solution.
Thank you. Regina. Yes.
I think I'm quite realistic. I think that there is not one solution, but many pieces of solution. And first of all, be proactive, as John said, to the migratory phenomenon, trying to find medium, long-term solution. Now in Europe we are working under emergency. It's been 20 years that we are in kind of emergency. The last 5-6 years, like the emergency is becoming very, very red, but we are in emergency. So this is not an emergency, this is a migratory phenomenon. And if you block one side, like a balloon, air balloon, you block one side, the people will go in another side. And if you squeeze too much, the balloon will explode, and that will be a big damage. So trying to be proactive. Second, now we are in Bangladesh. In Bangladesh, we are trying to help the Rohingya people. We are bringing humanitarian aid and medical aid, but also we are trying to improve the concept of humanitarian corridors. So helping small groups of people to relocate, because we need to think not only to give them food, shelter, water and medical aid, but the future of these people. Bangladesh is already a poor country and is doing their best. But what will be the future of all these ghost children if they will not have access to schools to improve themselves? So Canada, I think, could be, today I'm here to implant the seeds of hope also for the Rohingya community. I know that here there is already one community, and perhaps we can create a bridge between Bangladesh and Canada and trying to see if we can create a small humanitarian corridor that is an act of love and trying to help the most vulnerable people to be relocated in a safest place.
Lovely, thank you. Bernhard.
Well, when Angela Merkel opened the border for 1.3 million...
Can't hear Bernhard. Mic's not on.
It's on. When Angela Merkel opened the border for 1.3 million refugees, there was so much goodwill in Germany, and people helped and people engaged. And what I have seen, and this election really contributed to that, that people begin to give up hope. We can't do much anyway. So I think an element of the solution is really that people in Germany keep hoping and keep trying and keep working and keep engaging, and to be in this round and hear all this hope and goodwill is something that I'm happy to take back to Germany.
All right, Reni, last word.
Oh, wow. The pressure's on. I think the one thing that I would say is we should recognize power. We should recognize the dominant ideologies that we are working in and sometimes are complicit in. We should never be afraid to challenge that. And in challenging that, and I think somebody here, I think she was over there, mentioned ego. We should also not be scared to admit that when we are wrong, and we shouldn't be scared. I think there's a lot of fear of being wrong in a lot of these conversations, and we should sort of see our mistakes as opportunities to move forward.
That was lovely. The first 360, as Adrian learned last year, is the hardest. We're all getting used to the idea of it, to the complexities of it, to the opportunities of it. I love the audience this morning. Thank you so much. So young, says Margaret. You're feeling very binary right now, are you? There is so much more to come, and what we tried to do this morning is lay, as I said, the foundations for what's going to happen for the next day and a half. And it wasn't easy to try and do that as a group, and I want to thank you for your patience, for your eloquence, for your passion, for your ideas. Margaret Atwood, Regina Catrambone, Reni Eddo-Lodge, Robert Johnson, Bernhard Schlink. Thank you, everybody. Karen.
Thank you, Charlie, and thank you to our group. I also wanted to thank the people who are still watching on live stream at Albion, York Woods, and Cedar Brae Libraries. Thank you. We see you there. In a moment, I'm going to tell you about what's happening next. What I would like to do is ensure that our panel is just standing by, and then before you leave, if we can have a quick photo before you leave the stage. So quickly, what's happening now is we have a half-hour break, a little bit less. We're running over, so if you have to go to the bathroom, they're upstairs and basically that way. There's coffee upstairs, and then what happens is we break into 4 different